Even though parts of the world may be collapsing in on themselves at the moment, let's talk about something different. That being the continually increasing power of newer characters in relation to older units that leave older units feeling replaced or at worst obsolete, thus encouraging players to continuously switch to newer units to keep up with the ever-advancing arms race. Or instead of that mouthful, simply just power creep. The most simple definition of power creep is just newer units being better than older units, which is natural for a game that is evolving and constantly adding characters. And not only is it natural, to a certain degree it is healthy, as long as it's kept in check. About 2 years ago, shortly after Samara's release, I actually made a video on power creep, and it was mostly talking about how I didn't really think it existed, and in some ways, I didn't think they were doing it enough. But oh man, I wouldn't say that video aged poorly, because for the time it came out, I still stand by exactly what I said, but we've had a lot of things change in these last 2 years. We've had a lot of time to sit with Dendro and get a good opinion of it and its characters. We've had a whole new region in between then, and now we have an entirely new region starting. Not to mention, we are so close to getting the Pyro Archon, in which most of the community is actually wishing for some power creep. People want nothing more than to see Bennett and Xiangling fall from the thrones that they have held pretty much since Genshin's inception. Before I get into some of the negative aspects of the power creep direction that Genshin is taking, I want to reiterate some of the older points I made that I still think hold true. One of the bigger ones being weapons. In some cases, I felt that they haven't made signature weapons strong enough. That's one of the areas where I would personally expect a little bit more power creep to happen, given that these are tailor-made limited weapons for specific 5 stars. Doesn't mean they only benefit them, but it's meant to benefit them completely. And when you look at cases of 2 of the more modern, powerful DPS, Arlecchino and Neuvillette, their signature weapons are really good. They are amazing, but they're not so much better than the next best thing that you really feel bad about not having it. When it comes to weapons, I think they're still doing pretty good. They make powerful weapons that do feel good to roll for, but nothing too insane that your old stuff feels worthless. So in terms of weapons, I think they're still doing an amazing job. When it comes to characters, I used to describe the Genshin power creep graph as kind of a flat line that has spikes, and in some weird cases even like dips down. We've always gotten really powerful characters. When we initially got Ganyu, she felt like an overwhelming increase over everybody else. Then we got Hu Tao, and when people realized to play her properly, she seemed insane. And Hu Tao is even maintained to be strong to this day, and some people even still try to contend that she is just as strong as Arlecchino. I'm sorry, you are coping mega hard with that one. Hu Tao is strong, I'm not going to take that from you, but Arlecchino, well, she is part of the reason this video is even being made in the first place, but more on her later. And it's not even all DPS. We got Kazuha extremely early, and it's still one of the best units to this day. I want to still talk about some of the things that came after all. I'm just talking about the overall timeline. You know, we got Raiden Shogun, really powerful with constellations, and at the time was an incredible DPS. As for the other DPS that released around the time of Raiden Shogun, or just in version 2.0 in general, you know, Ayaka, Ayato, Ito, Yoimiya, very average DPS, no one that really rocked the boat too hard. This trend even continued on into 3.0. The only crazy DPS we really got in 3.0 was Alhaitham. As for the other DPS, we got like Tighnari, Cyno, Nilou, Wanderer. Out of those units, nobody that really rocked the boat too hard. In Cyno's case, he probably came in underpowered, even weaker than probably Tighnari, who was a standard unit. Now at this point, we are beyond the point where my old video was created. I made that in December of 2022, which meant Alhaitham wasn't even out yet when I made that video. That being said, Alhaitham would not have changed my opinion on the overall view of power creep. I still would have said, yeah, it doesn't really exist, because Alhaitham just would have appeared like an anomaly spike, just like Hu Tao was. For better or for worse, I think those days are behind us. Dendro as a whole, I would not call power creep. Some people may call Dendro power creep because its reactions were incredibly powerful, easy to use, and led to a massive mix-up in the meta. But Dendro did not rise alone. It brought up Electro units, it brought up Hydra units as if they needed the help. Hell, Dendro even managed to take a trash unit like Kuki, who I would have called bottom 5, and turn her into a contender for top 10, maybe even top 5 units for a period of time. Then comes Fontaine, and this is where the narrative really starts to change. It barely takes any time at all for Fontaine to give us our first insane unit, being Neuvillette. Not only is he capable of contending with the best in single target, but he has without a doubt the best AoE in the entire game, being able to do his insane damage consistently to as many things as he can line up, which he doesn't even need an Animo grouper to help him with. Sure, it may help in some cases, but really he doesn't need it. Good positioning is all you need. Just as we're were finally getting used to Nouvelette's craziness, then Farina comes along. Yeah, she's a support, and that's a different category than Nouvelette being a DPS, but Farina is so goddamn insane that it almost becomes like a meme for a while of everybody being like, hey, did you hear my main got buffed? Because Farina buffs literally everybody. Not only is Farina giving a damage percent buff that makes Yelan weep tears of sadness, but she is doing it to the entire party, not just whoever's on field. We're not even done with her craziness yet, because her being in the party allows any DPS to use the Marichos Hunter set. There are DPS that prior had no sets that really felt appropriate for them, and this set is so incredibly generic that if you can activate it, you can use it, and Farina allows anybody to activate it. Luckily for us, it's not as if Farina rose to power by herself. Every single healer in the game has benefited from Farina's existence. They became better for her existing. Despite that benefit, her level of power creep is undeniable, and I'd even mention her personal damage, which is pretty damn good considering it has no activation requirement. You just need to be standing near any enemy or fire pit and they will go nuts. Shortly after Farina, we get Shiori, which in the grand scheme of things, certainly not a power creepy unit. She was not some insane support that came and disrupted the meta, but what she did do is basically one-to-one power creep Albedo, which left a little bit of an ick in some people's mouths. When done properly, this can be a pretty acceptable level of power creep. I'm not so sure if people really have a problem with Xingqiu and Yelan, for example, or a more recent example being like Shilinin and Kazuha. The thing about supports is most of the time when you just make a basically better version of one, we just get to have two, which is something that is incredibly nice. DPS, on the other hand, incredibly competitive. You only have two slots. Genshin is not a game that supports double DPS comps, so when one is just way better than the rest, they're going to get a lot of attention. Which, speaking of, given Nouvelette's power, I was expecting no one to really match him or take his spot for quite a while, but then not too long after, we get Arlecchino. While a lot of people probably could have seen it coming with Arlecchino given how popular she was, and the fact that she's a Harbinger, not that that has done Child or Tartaggles any good, I was both pleasantly and delightfully surprised with her absolutely absurd level of power. She is death incarnate. You see, unlike Nouvelette, Arlecchino has flexibility in spades. Possibly even more important than just flexibility, she doesn't need Farina. And in the modern landscape of Genshin Impact meta, not needing Farina and still being powerful is probably the single best attribute you can have. Nouvelette, for better or for worse, is pretty much married to always being in a team with Farina if you want to maximize his effectiveness. He is so unique and weird in the way he plays that he just doesn't work with most characters, and Farina just so happens to synergize with him pretty much perfectly. Now Arlecchino, on the other hand, put her in Overload, put her in Monopyro, put her in Double Vape, just like you've been doing with your Hu Tao for many years. She can do many different things with many different teams, many different supports, and she is ludicrously powerful in all of them. Add insult to injury, she goes well beyond that with so much favoritism. Not only does she get a transforming weapon into a scythe that made a lot of people collectively freak out, but she also does other weird stupid crap like being able to kill flying enemies while standing on the ground. Not that that's a common occurrence, but hey, it's kind of cool that she can do that. Our shielded enemies being a dick attack behind their shields, because why not? Long burst infusions that get removed when you swap off characters getting you down, why not have an infusion that lasts forever, because fuck it. Her AoE is insane for a melee character, and she's honestly pretty damn mobile around the battlefield. Like, in a lot of ways, her kit oozes favoritism. And even though I foolishly thought the exact same thing with Nouvelette, I find it really hard to imagine anyone really matching these two units' power level. I have heard some try to say that Milani has matched Nouvelette in power, but I don't know. Optimistically, I would say that's probably comparing single target number to single target number and not factoring in that Nouvelette can do it to like 30 targets if given the opportunity. Milani can certainly hit some big numbers, and to some people that just scratches the right itch in their brain, but to say she's as strong as Nouvelette and Arlecchino, I just don't know about that one. Now what I do know is that the final subject of this, Shilinin, is basically the sign of the apocalypse coming. If somebody told me a year ago that Kazuha was going to be power crept pretty decidedly, what I would have assumed is that you meant to say that every single DPS that belongs to any of the swirlable elements that Kazuha buffed all got power crept by Animo, Geo, or Dendro DPS. Kazuha has such a good, concise kit that buffs so many units in a very generic, easy to use way that I would have never assumed that he would just be directly power crept. And while in many ways he does still have a place in the meta alongside Shilinin, Shilinin just does what he does for a lot of units, but a little bit better while also healing. You know, at some points in the game's history, adding just a heal to Kazuha's kit would not have always changed so much because usually he's paired with Bennett. But once Farina came along, not only did healer stocks go way the hell up, but Bennett also became a harder fit in a lot of teams. With her signature and the right artifact set, Shilinin basically instantly gives another Furina-sized damage percent buff again to the entire party potentially. She's even got the resistance shred, except hers is a lot easier to use given that it's an aura around her instead of a debuff you apply to enemies, with a longer duration. Look, she's new, we all know what she does and all the many benefits she brings, and it's absolutely insane to me that she did essentially power creep Kazuha. I would have called him an untouchable unit because Genshin just hasn't exactly taught us that units get replaced easily. When a powerful unit comes along, we've more been trained to think that like, oh god, this was a mistake and we probably won't get anything like it again. They'll be more cautious. Or at the very least, they'll sell it to us in constellations like Xingqiu and Yelan. Xingqiu applies a ton of Hydro, and to get Yelan up to that level, you gotta get some constellations. Supports are just on a whole different thing though, because like I said earlier, when a support gets power crept, a lot of the time we're just like, yeah, a second one. While a lot of these characters I mentioned have been incredibly powerful and massive spikes for the power of the game, I didn't mention a lot of the units that have come between them. We do still get moderately powerful units that don't upset the balance of things, that are just decently strong. Wriothesley is just a good DPS. Clorind is just a good DPS. Kanich, I don't own him, but he also just seems like a good DPS. They're not making waves. A respectable DPS, they will get the job done, and luckily for us, while the unit power creep is getting kind of insane, and I think the spikes are not only getting bigger, you know, they're more frequent, the content of the game just isn't scaling to that level, thank God. And possibly even more importantly, some of the craziest power spikes have been coming from support units, which tend to benefit everybody. Furina and Shilinin are ridiculous, but they also benefited a vast majority of the cast at the same time. And I'd even mention a unit like Navia, who at the time, she was a pretty good DPS, but I wouldn't call her a power spike. Now, when Shilinin came out, especially if you get her C2, all of a sudden Navia possibly becomes a contender for being even like Nuvolette in our Lakino tier. Needless to say, this is all giving me insane expectations for what to expect from Mavika the Pyro Archon. He's an Archon that obviously leads to a lot of expectations being overpowered. Every single one since Venti has been kind of a monster in their own way. Even Venti was for a time. They just kind of screwed him over with a bunch of mobs that, you know, don't really get impacted by his ability. Yeah, I think the days of the flat line or even steady incline graph are a little bit behind us. I believe things will start climbing pretty steadily at this point and spikes will get a little bit bigger. But let's just hope in terms of power creep, we don't quite get as crazy as Star Rail has been.